Hey, this is Bing from Wonder Bing Travel, and welcome to week 2 of the Summer of Wonder as I plan and then take an epic month-long road trip from central Pennsylvania all the way to the Rockies and back. This week we're talking about creating a budget for your road trip that you can love, and I promise it's a good thing. So if you're new to the Summer of Wonder or to the Wonder Bing channel, please check out week 1 last week, which was creating our treasure map, which is really the very first place to start when you are going to take a solo road trip. The Summer of Wonder is all about taking my Amazon #1 top new release, There's Wonder Around the Bend, and pulling out all of the great stuff and putting it to the test. The book is an inspiring guide for solo road trippers. And so that's what we're doing. We are inspiring and equipping as we plan and then take this massive trip later this summer. Last week we started with our treasure map, which is really the first place that you should start when you're planning a solo road trip. If you didn't see that video, which is week 1 of the Summer of Wonder, check it out here. And then also you definitely want to hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any of our Summer of Wonder videos. There'll be a new one every week as we plan and then take this awesome trip. Now let's get on the road and talk about that budget. I know, budgeting sounds icky in a way, and then you're thinking about vacation and you just don't really want to deal with it. But I'll tell you what, giving yourself the permission to create a budget of sorts, and it can be kind of loose, it doesn't have to be down to the penny or anything, but giving yourself permission to create a budget before you go really creates space for you to relax and enjoy, truly seek freedom and wonder on your road trip. And that's what we're all about. So today we're just boiling it down really to 2 main things. One is, how are you going to pay for it? And the second one is just considering 3 different categories of spending that are really necessary to set yourself up for relaxation and fun and really not worrying about money while you're seeking freedom and wonder on your road trip. Okay, so let's dive into those 2 things. How are you going to pay for it? And then the 3 categories of spending. Let's tackle the how we're going to pay for it first. There's a couple options here. So the first one is, are you going to save, or are you going to need to save before you can take this road trip? Possibly. You know your bank account, you know who you are and how you work. So I'm just presenting them to you, and then you will need to figure it out. The second one is that you don't need to save. Maybe you already have the money, you've already saved it, or you just have a lifestyle and an income where you don't really need to save. Good for you. God bless you. The third option I wanted to present was, are you possibly going to spend the money on a credit card and then pay it off later? So I don't recommend this for obvious reasons. I'm not a financial person. I'm not here to give you financial advice. But obviously, if you pay for it over time, you're going to spend a lot more money than you actually spent in the first place with all the interest. However, I do want to make a plug for one thing. If you have a really great travel credit card, something that earns you points and miles, it might be worth it to put everything on that credit card, keep it all together, keep it all really easy to understand, and then pay the entire balance off before you accrue any interest. I do have a credit card that I would recommend if you're going to do that. It's the one I use. I've had it for years. I love it. I haven't paid for airfare or for hotels for quite a long time because I save my points and use them for those things when I travel. I will put the details below. I will also include them on my blog, and I'll give you that link below as well. You should know that I do get a little bit of a kickback if you do use the link below or in my blog. I do appreciate you supporting my channel and my business, and Lexi just gets more treats, basically, is what that comes down to. I would also say, just in reference to the card, is that I use this card for everything I possibly can. I pay all the bills I can with it, and I pay it off absolutely 100% at the end of every month so that I never have any interest charges. And so I enjoy all the great benefits of this card without any of the downsides of having a credit card. So just something to think about, whether you are saving for it or whether you already have the money. If you do decide to pay for it all on a credit card where you can earn points, just a thought. So, of course, how much you're going to spend is tied to a lot of other pieces of your road trip that we haven't really explored yet. Things like lodging and food, and how far you're going, and how long you're going to be gone. So just know that all of those things are connected. And in the book, I talk a lot about that connection and how you can't really just do one without the other. For the purposes of our conversation today, I'm going to dive into those 3 categories of expenses because that really informs everything else, and also it may determine how you decide to pay for it. So one of the really cool things about my book is that you get lifetime access to all the resources. I have a website set up just for people who purchase the book, who can go back over and over and over again, and I will update them over time, and you'll always have access. And one of those big things is related to the budgeting chapter. So those 3 categories of spending that I talked about are money that you will spend before you go. So I call that pre-trip spending. And then, of course, in-trip spending. And then the last thing is an emergency fund. Pre-trip spending. You know, a lot of people think about their road trip and how much the lodging is going to cost and how much your food and your gas is going to cost. And those are absolutely major things to consider. But a lot of the money that you're going to spend on a road trip will be spent before you ever pull out of the driveway. So in There's Wonder Around the Bend, I do a deep dive into each one of those pre-trip categories. And I'll give you a quick overview here for now. When you access the resources for the book, you're going to find a sheet for pre-trip spending. And I've given you a breakout of all those categories that I think pretty much cover the major expenditures that you would have. And please understand, if you're taking a weekend road trip, these are going to be minimal. If you're heading out of town for a month, and especially if it's your first trip, then some of these things are going to cost you a little bit. Certainly there are things that can be borrowed and rented and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just going to put it all out there and you can figure out what works best for you. So my categories are things like clothing, shoes, coolers, packing containers, bags, bins, all that kind of stuff. Also tech items related to your phone or computer, camping gear, hiking gear, pet-related gear if your pet is traveling with you, and then a super important one for pre-trip spending is vehicle maintenance. So making sure your car is good to go before you leave home and have fewer problems when you're on the road. So on this sheet, I give you all the categories, and then I give you a chance to think about what do you already own, what do you need, what would you like to have but you don't have, how much you think it could all cost, and then a way to keep track of the actual costs and then the difference there as well. And then on a separate sheet, I give you, and you can copy as many of these as you want, do one for each of those individual categories. So what are all the clothing items or the pet items or the gear items that you might need this year? So all of that is here for you in the resources. Figuring all of that out will start to give you a good idea of how much money this is going to cost. And then you can decide, you know what, I need to go for a shorter period of time, or no, this is less than I thought, and maybe I can expand a little bit. So you'll have a feel for it as you go. A quick example here would be the pet gear. I'll just use that one as an example because this year, even though I've been road tripping for many years now, and this is Lexi's 6th year on the road with me, that I have certainly accrued things over time. But you know what? Sometimes things need to be replaced or we do things differently. And this year seems to be the year where I'm spending a little bit more on pet gear. And next week's video actually is going to highlight probably my favorite pet gear purchase of the year. I'm super excited. So I won't give that away right now, but come back for next week's video. And of course, there's a whole chapter in the book called Dog on Board that gives you all the ins and outs of taking your dog or suppose your cat on the road with you, and it has packing lists and all that type of thing included in the resources. So make sure you get that. You don't want to miss any of that stuff. So those are all the in-trip expenses, and going through my budgeting sheets and just really being real with yourself about what you think you're going to need and how long will help you tremendously to arrive at some sort of number, just ballpark number of what you think it's going to cost. And then we have to dive into what it's going to cost when you're actually on the road. Now you're thinking about those expenses for when you're on the road. And you're going to want to think about these long before you leave. This is where you can spend an enormous amount of money if you don't plan. So there's really 3 biggies: food, gas, lodging.
Okay, gas you obviously can't pay for until you go. Lodging is a mix. Some of these things you can make reservations and pay ahead of time before you leave, whether it's camping or a hotel or an Airbnb. Other things you may need to wing it and figure it out as you go. And then the other big expense is food. So there's groceries to buy in advance, snacks to buy in advance, there's eating out. It's also worth factoring in those extra things, like maybe you're going to visit wineries or breweries, or you're going to go out for coffee, things that maybe you're not normally thinking about in terms of regular food. And just coming up with a total, right? Estimating it and coming up with a total of how much you think you're going to be spending on food and then also on lodging. There are other categories as well, and I do go into more detail in the book, but they are things like entry fees to places, park passes, a national park pass, for example. Also tolls, and then keepsakes. Are there things that you're planning to buy that you want to bring back home? So all of those things add up to the in-trip expenses and also the pre-trip expenses. So you can get a really good idea about how much money this is going to cost you. And let me give you a little tip. There's a really good chance you're going to spend a little bit more than whatever it is you figure out. Good for you. God bless you if you can figure out how to spend less than you plan for. But for me, I always just have a little extra buffer in there because I'm likely going to spend a little bit more on that one thing that I just couldn't not buy or do. And that's part of the fun. That's part of the wonder, right? So you just want to be able to afford the wonder, because sometimes wonder does cost money. Not very often, but sometimes it does. Okay, let's tackle that last category, which is an emergency fund. This doesn't have to be a really big deal, but it's something you should absolutely think about before you go. So in the book, I talk a little bit more deeply about these, but let me give you just a quick highlight. And that is that I look at this in two ways. One is to have cash in my car with me in case I need it for things that are unexpected. In the book, I go through a ton of safety information and what to do if you lose things like your wallet or your debit card or a credit card or all of that. So I won't go into that here. But let's just talk about if you need some cash. Make sure you take $100, $200, $300, whatever works for you. Because there are times and places where it may not even be an emergency, but there's things you may want to purchase that cash is the only thing that you can use. So make sure you have some cash for that reason. And then the second thing would be in case of a bigger problem. So a major car expenditure or something unexpected. And this isn't necessarily money that I think you should take with you. It's just knowing that you have access to X amount of dollars if you had a big problem at some point and you just needed, let's say you needed to fly home and that was completely not in your plans. Do you have money to be able to do that? Do you have a stash? Do you have an emergency fund that's funded in your savings account, for example? Or would you rely on a credit card? You do you, but just think through it so that you know exactly what you would do if the occasion arose. So having a budget for a road trip is not a Debbie Downer. It is not meant to feel bad or to make you feel less excited about your trip. In fact, the whole idea of having a budget is freeing you up so that when you go, you have an expectation and an understanding of your money so that you can just relax and enjoy yourself. So I hope that's helpful to you. And here's a couple more little thoughts from the road.
So that's it. And if you want more detail, go back to my longer, more in-depth video on budgeting that I'll post here. So if you're one of those people like me that benefits a lot from seeing it all written down, then you'll find some of it in the notes below. But absolutely go to my blog, wonderbeingtravel.com/blog, where I will share in written form all the things that you found here, and probably a little bit more. Okay, time to go home and get back to work. I gotta get ready for next week's video, which is super fun because I got to spend a little bit of that money that I talked about budgeting for this go around, and I'm going to be sharing with you the fun things that I've added this year to my gear as we prepare to head out for the Summer of Wonder. And don't forget to subscribe because you don't want to miss out on any of these videos and all the fun things connected to the Summer of Wonder. And if you're not sure where to start, don't start with a budget. You need some inspiration first. So go back to the treasure map video and check that out first. Lexi and I will see you on the road.